Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Feeding the Future with Alternative Proteins webinar today. Very excited to have you all join us as we kick off this really critically important discussion on the future of our food system and the way that we sustainably and successfully feed the world. My name is James Battersill, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. Before I kick off, I do want to acknowledge that I am here on Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located in the treaty territories and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Dakota Oyote, Dene Suline, and Nihenuak nations. We also acknowledge that Manitoba is located in the homeland of the Red River Métis, and we acknowledge that northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are ancestral lands of the Inuit. For the format for today's webinar, I am going to kick things off for you with a very short presentation on myself, and then we are going to be joined by two very esteemed guests that I'm very excited to have a conversation with. Dr. Stacy Payet, the Program Manager, Proteins for Life at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and Priera Penescu, who is the lead scientist at the Good Food Institute in sunny California. Afterwards, the three of us are going to have a group discussion about how we grow the plant and alternative protein sector to overcome some of the challenges that the industry is facing right now. Now, as the audience, we of course want you to be involved. We want you to have a chance to ask some critically important questions. So please ask those questions in the question and answer portion of the Zoom webinar. And I will warn you, I want good, robust discussion. We are going to be encouraging challenging questions. We've got fantastic experts that have an enormous amount of subject matter expertise in this space. So no fluff, no softballs, no easy answers. We want the difficult questions to be sent to us, ones that'll spur on meaningful and important debate, because at the end of the day, some contrast and conflicting ideas presented and discussed respectfully is the thing that drives progress at the end of the day. So we really want you to be engaged, involved, ask good questions, don't be shy. It's what's going to spur on the discussion, not only today, but I think truly for the future of this industry. I'll let you know as well that the webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Government of Manitoba website afterwards. And I believe that all of the panelists have agreed to allow their presentations to be shared as well. And with that said, I'm going to kick things off and share just a little bit about myself. There we go. So I have worked in the plant and alternative protein sector for 5 years now, but my career in food and agriculture has spanned 15. My name is James Battersill, and I'm the founder of a Winnipeg-based food processing company called Juno Food Labs, or Juno for short. We developed a consumer packaged goods product line called Bump Plant Enhanced Meat. And as the name implies, we make exclusively hybrid products that combine ordinary meat with plant and alternative protein. And we really have a core focus on sustainability and reducing the amount of resources that are required to make our products. Now, despite what this picture may imply, I have no true subject matter expertise in food science or in business for that matter. I actually studied political economics in university and worked for the first decade of my career for a farmer advocacy organization here in Manitoba. But one thing that I was learning extensively and working on that spurred me on to start Juno was because we were dealing with an enormous number of issues around climate change. And we were studying and evaluating and doing work that looked both at agriculture's greenhouse gas emissions contributions, but even sometimes more substantially looking at the challenges that climate change was presenting for our farmers and for the agricultural systems in general. And we were learning more and more about how challenging it is going to be to produce food in a way that's both sustainable, but also consistent and predictable and affordable, as we see more and more variation in growing and production conditions, as we see more climatic variability around the world. So that knowledge and insight was really often the meetings that I was attending and the experts that I were speaking to was being prepared and presented in contrast with another phenomenon that we were experiencing and continue to experience, which is the growing global demand for meat and for protein. We know that something really positive is actually happening around the world, is that we're seeing more economic development and more people and households rising out of poverty. And what we often see is when households start having a little bit of additional income, they typically invest it in two areas. First, they invest in education for their kids, but the second area is often they add more protein into their diets. So we're seeing this not only have we seen an enormous growth in the demand for animal protein and plant protein as well in the last 30 years, we expect over the next 25 for that to increase to the point where we're potentially needing to double the amount of animal protein production over the 50-year period between 2000 and 2050. So the trouble that I saw when I saw those two sort of complementary pieces of information and knowledge was that while we're seeing an increase in variability around food and agriculture and the production systems and the weather and climate that farmers work within, and the increasing demand for protein and meat. The reality, unfortunately, is that we already allocate 80% of all agricultural land around the world for raising livestock and growing feed crops. So when I looked at that math, I realized that we needed to find a way to make meat using fewer resources, or else we were going to see an enormous number of challenges around loss of biodiversity, more greenhouse gas emissions, landowners being pressured to bring more conservation land into production, rising food costs, water scarcity, and a whole host of other challenges, which really for me drove me to take some action and see what I could do to have a meaningful change and meaningfully contribute to a problem that I think is probably the quietest big challenge that the globe is going to be facing in the next 20 years. And now the challenge that I was facing in my old job is that while I was working on some of these challenges as a lobbyist and working within the political system, I was also experiencing firsthand just how difficult it is to move the needle on this file politically. Food and farming present these incredibly challenging public policy issues. And while I very, very firmly believe that government action is really required and necessary to be the right catalyst for solving many social, economic, and environmental issues, I just didn't see a path forward that how any government on its own could solve this particular challenge. And while that's true, I was also learning that humanity has other tools available to it to help solve challenges of this magnitude, one being technological solutions and advancement in technology. And while when I started my company 5 years ago, the plant-based and meat sector was really starting to emerge. What got me really excited was the potential around precision fermentation, where we're using yeast and microflora to produce true animal proteins. And so in 2019, when I started my company, what I was focused on was how do we create a path that we can introduce consumers to these novel protein technologies when they become available? And how can we make sure that people are taking advantage and we're getting the benefits of all of these technologies and not seeing barriers emerge when the new technology that can have significant sustainability impacts becomes available. So that sort of comes to the approach that we take with our product development. When I launched my company in 2019, I saw that there were a lot of founders that were working in this space that were vegan or at least vegetarian. And I think that it really led them to miss the opportunity that's presented from hybrid products. Everyone knew that for alternative protein to be successful, we needed to win over non-vegetarian consumers. But I was seeing a lot of companies emerge in this space that they themselves weren't non-vegetarian consumers, and I think fail to completely understand the values and needs of that consumer class. So we have, again, focused exclusively on making hybrid products. Right now, we would combine ordinary meat with plant-based protein, but we are trialing some precision fermented alternative protein in combination, again, with regular meats at this time for our product lineups. Again, in an effort to really connect directly with those non-vegetarian or vegan consumers. And the reality is, when we launched, we actually got a lot of pushback, I think, from the plant-based meat and the alternative protein industry writ large. They were sort of, you got to remember, in 2019, it was, the industry was skyrocketing, growth was incredible. It looked like it was to the moon without any barriers for the alternative protein sector. And so we sort of were a bit dismissed at first, where people looked and said, oh, is your product really necessary? You're going to be obsolete in a couple of years when fully plant-based meat and alternative protein achieves mass market adoption. And we said, I don't think that that's the case. I think that there's going to be barriers that it presented. And I think that we've been, shown that that's been true over the last half decade, where we saw this incredible growth and emergence of this meaningful industry that has had a meaningful impact, but unfortunately has seen a fairly predictable slowdown in growth. And I think that it's fair to say that we've really hit a point where there is new action and new approaches that need to be taken to move the industry forward. I'm not a doom and gloom person. I'm not throwing this slide up to discourage anyone. I think it's important, though, to look at the reality of the situation that we're in. It drives me a little bit crazy when people say, oh, this is just a hiccup. That's, the slowdown in growth of the plant-based meat sector or alternative proteins, or the declining investment in this space is just a hiccup. And the reality is that it's not a hiccup. It's a part of what is a very normal technology adoption curve. And I think it's something that needs to be analyzed and adopted, or analyzed and discussed, and really meaningfully addressed by the stakeholders, including everyone that's on this call, including your presenters. Because every single new technology that emerges typically hits this technology adoption chasm, where you've already sort of exhausted your early market adopters who see the benefits of the new technology, but breaking through to that mainstream customer class is incredibly challenging. And at the end of the day, I think that that's the work that we're focused on, and that's what we're going to be focused on discussing, is how do we bridge that chasm? How do we achieve mainstream adoption? What actions need to be taken? So Stacy, Prier, and myself had a chance to chat briefly last week about this exact issue. And we decided that while there's an enormous number of actions that do need to be taken, we decided to focus and narrow our conversation today on three key areas, one being product taste, product price, and then a really broad category that sort of crosses both those two other things and a whole variety of others that we sort of call cultural forces, that include things like religious and cultural preferences, perceptions around naturalness, masculinity, sustainability claims, neophobia, or just the fear of new things. All of these things have to be addressed and discussed in combination. And that's what I'm excited to do today with our esteemed guests that we have joining us. I'm going to stop my presentation there. I've got lots of discussion and ideas that I want to bring to you forward, but I'm going to cede the floor over to Priera Penescu, the lead scientist for plant-based specialist at the Good Food Institute. We're going to hear from her now, and then followed by Dr. Stacy Payette. And I'm very excited to talk to these two people. I had an opportunity to research their backgrounds a little bit, and they're very, very clearly have immense knowledge and background and expertise in this space. And I'm very excited to have a fulsome conversation with them. So again, I'll leave you here, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Priera.
Thank you so much, James. That was an excellent presentation and tee up. And I love the lead dishwasher title at Juno Food Labs. But yeah, could not agree more with a lot of the sentiments that James shared during his presentation. And I'm really excited. I think this will be a good add-on, yes, and to what James was presenting as well. But yes, my name is Pri. I'm so excited to talk to you guys today about emerging trends and opportunities in the alternative protein sector. I will be talking today first about what the Good Food Institute does, and then I'll talk a little bit about where the industry is right now, and then where I think we could really be working towards getting the market to a place that's not flat or declining. So, starting off with the Good Food Institute, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're a nonprofit think tank working to develop the roadmap for a sustainable, secure, and just food system by advancing alternative proteins. And we work across areas in corporate engagement, science and technology, and policy. So we know any nascent industry really needs that trifecta of government, industry, and researchers in academia and startup environments really doing innovative work in order to propel it up. And we are laser focused on feeding a growing population sustainably, efficiently, and safely. As James touched upon, the conventional protein production system does contribute to some of the world's most pressing problems, like climate change, antibiotic resistance, pandemic risk, loss of biodiversity, and food insecurity. And we know that global meat consumption is projected to continue rising significantly. And alternative proteins can really allow us to diversify our protein system so that as it grows, we can really do it in a way that is sustainable for our planet and can feed 10 billion people. So we're focused on making products that consumers really love. We're not asking consumers to give up the diet that they really like. It's about making products that are really there for the consumer and they want to consume. And so taste, price, and culture, as James said, are just incredibly important and things that we focus on. We work a lot by sharing open access research. So I'll be sharing a lot of reports today about open access research that we've done. Please explore them more later on. And we engage directly with food industry stakeholders such as manufacturers, distributors, investors, scientists, policymakers, and more. All right, so I'm going to talk about the state of the industry in 2023. Every single year, GFI releases at least 3 reports in the areas of plant-based, cultivated meat and seafood, and fermentation. And we examine the state of the industry for the past year. These are really, really valuable reports. I highly recommend taking a look at them. We also have webinars that accompany these reports and have a lot of the really important information in them. So if you're a webinar learner or you prefer a report in front of you, either way, it's really easy to digest information about these industries. Today, because I'm the plant-based scientist and because those are what's available in the market right now, I will be a little bit more focused on the plant-based state of the industry, but I really encourage everyone to look at cultivated meat and fermentation as well. So globally, Euromonitor estimates that the retail category for plant-based meat and seafood is over $6 billion, with more than 50% of these dollar sales coming from the last 15 years, coming from the most recent 5. So again, as James mentioned, in 2019, 2020, even maybe like a little bit of early 2021, we saw a really big boom and then kind of a flatten out in the market. But the story of plant-based meat and seafood trends goes beyond a single channel or market. Nonetheless, it does appear that there is really good opportunity for us to meet consumer demands and drive first-time and repeat purchasers. So for example, here is the market share of different plant-based meat or plant-based foods, and their shares of the respective overall category. So the leaders include plant-based milk, so it captures 15% of the milk category, creamer at 8%, and protein liquids and powders at 6%. This is actually US data. I do want to mention that. So this is specifically for the US, but I think pretty indicative of what's going on in Canada and Europe as well. But we do see that the natural channel line, which is in yellow bars, we actually see that plant-based shares are a lot higher than the total retail market. So this is an encouraging signal that the natural channel is where these new trends tend to start. But we do have an opportunity to really capture more of the market, especially in the meat and seafood spaces. Additionally, looking at household penetration, we see that repeat rates these are the repeat and penetration rates for many of the plant-based categories. So 6 in 10 households did purchase at least one plant-based category in 2023, and nearly half purchased plant-based milk. For plant-based meat and seafood and other categories, 15% or fewer households purchase these products. And I think that these figures represent progress, but really opportunity. We have the opportunity to capture a lot more of the market. So conventional categories of meat and eggs and milk and cheese are purchased by more than 90% of households and have repeat purchasers in more than 90% of households. So we have a lot of opportunity to catch up in these plant-based categories. And when it comes to acceptance and adoption of alternative proteins, it's a really complex challenge, but taste, price, and health do tend to be top motivators for consumers. 53% of individuals in the US agree that plant-based meat products should actually taste like meat. And price also remains a top lever. Um, Additionally, perceived nutrition can definitely be a roadblock. So among US consumers, 48% that do believe that plant-based meat alternatives are too processed, and 62% believe that conventional meat is part of a healthy diet. So I'll touch upon those a little bit more too. But we do see that concerns for the environment are definitely in growing consideration for younger consumers. So among consumers aged 16 to 40, so that's like Gen Z and millennials across 10 different countries, 66% say that they expect to consume more plant-based products in the future. So we definitely see that this is the future, but how do we actually get there? How do we get people to actually buy these products and keep them in their households? And one of the top concerns is cost. So first I'll touch upon the price premium right now for plant-based meats. Um, we see that across different categories, and I'm so sorry the alignment here got messed up. Here's total meat is the, let me see if I can. Yes. Okay. You guys can see this. Okay. So total meat is this one right here. We see that there's a 77 percent price premium there. This is actually beef over here, the 20% price premium. Then we have chicken, pork, turkey. So this box is supposed to be all of the meat products. And then on this last line here, the milk and eggs that got shifted over, here's the price premium for milk, and here's the price premium for eggs. So we see overall 77% average price premium for milk, rather for meat, and then a 104% price premium for milk and a 317 price premium for eggs. So there's a lot of opportunity here for us to lower costs in these plant-based foods. A BCG Blue Horizon and BCG analysis from 2021 did estimate that in 2022 plant-based meat, or 2023 rather, plant-based meat would reach price parity with conventional products. And while this seems definitely really ambitious since we're in 2024 and we're not quite seeing that yet, we did see a few indicators of us getting there where either conventional meat costs were raised so much that plant-based meats did reach price parity in the Netherlands in 2022. Additionally, Just Egg, for instance, reduced the price of their products and was able to reach price parity with conventional eggs momentarily in 2022. So there are opportunities, both because of the fluctuating supply chain in the meat markets that make costs a little bit volatile, but then also for improved costs across the plant-based and other alternative protein value chains. Next, I'll quickly touch upon taste. There's so many opportunities in us being able to improve taste, starting all the way at the crop, especially in Canada. There's so many wonderful crops that are being grown, many pulses that can do wonderful, wonderful things for functionality for these alternative protein products. One other thing that I really want to touch upon are these alternative fats products. I think people kind of forget when we say alternative protein that the fats are incredibly important. They're such an important part of the animal-based product experience, right? When you bite into a juicy burger, milk's creaminess, the way that cheese is formed, it's so dependent on that fat. And there's a ton of companies in the plant-based fermentation and cultivated space that are working on making these really delightful fat products that are much better than coconut oil, the currently used ingredient in plant-based meats. So keep an eye out for these innovations as well. And I know canola oil is a part of a lot of these innovations, where we could structure canola oil in a way that makes it solid, but we still get the health benefits of canola oil over a more saturated coconut oil, for instance. I also want to touch upon hybrid products. In this slide, I really talk about plant-based fermentation and cultivated meat hybrid products. So really hybridizing these alternative protein products. But I think the work that James is doing is also wonderful. And we should also be keeping an eye towards these blended products with conventional meat products, really giving the consumer what they need in order to hit that sustainability point in their diets, with being able to touch upon really great taste that satisfies the consumer at a good price point. I also want to share a few resources that we have on nutrition. We have a wonderful webinar by Dr. Christopher Gardner from Stanford University available on our YouTube playlist about the cardiovascular risk reduction of plant-based meat alternatives. He also touches upon a number of other health and nutrition topics within that. And it's just a really a wonderful webinar. And I wouldn't be able to present it much better myself. So I think Dr. Gardner is a really great example there. We also have a plant-based meat nutrition fact sheet. So for anyone who wants to take a look at that, but the short summary is that yes, these have protein. They have protein at the levels of the conventional meat products. So that is not a worry. A lot of these also have protein at a digestibility that is on par with conventional meat products. Is some room, I think, that plant-based meat products can work on in decreasing the amount of sodium in their products, as well as increasing the amount of micronutrients like B12. But at the end of the day, we know that nutrition is about a whole diet and it's not about one product. So everybody who is really concerned about health and nutrition should be looking at their entire diet and not just focus on one product that they're consuming some of the time. I also really want to touch upon processing very quickly. I love this roadmap from UKRI, and I highly recommend taking a look at it, but I'll just quickly read this quote from it where there's a perception that ultra processed food is always unhealthy. Sympathetic processing is the processing of food which can promote the release of more nutrients. There's a need in the medium term to bring back narrative to the evidence base and open the dialogue amongst stakeholders and knowledge partners to achieve this. Once misinformation is neutralized by evidence in the longer term, there's a need to change the consumer mindset about the need of processing. So I really want to leave on that note that a lot of the processing that's being done with plant-based meat is sympathetic processing. It's actually making the protein more digestible. It's releasing more micronutrients. It's decreasing the amount of anti-nutrients. So this perception of it being unhealthy is actually really negative because it is the sympathetic processing. We have a number of other resources. So I'll leave you here with this. Please feel free to take a look at these resources if you want to dive deeper on any more information, but also please feel free to reach out to me at any point if you have any questions about this. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stacy.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Preet. That was wonderful. I've got so many questions and things I want to discuss, but I think we'll hand it over to Stacy, Dr. Stacy Payet from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. She'll correct me on pronunciation again, and she'll round out this discussion for us before we jump into our roundtable.
Thank you for the introduction, James, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation to be here. Yeah, so Stacy Pyatt, I'll do it once for you, although that last go at it was pretty good, James. Wageningen University and Research, an academic institution in the Netherlands. Some of you may know, my function there is to oversee our work on proteins and the protein transition. I am a program manager, and the program we talk about is Proteins for Life, because we think that that's the reason why we have proteins. And I'm going to talk you through some of what's happening in the Netherlands, and it's a bit of a good news, bad news kind of story, but you'll see as we go. But I always like to start with just acknowledging that we talk about one protein transition as if we all have this sort of same narrative, or that we're all thinking about this in the same way. And I just like to acknowledge that in these sort of sub-narratives or these sort of different motivations that we have, there are drivers behind it. So for example, one of the narratives inside of the protein transition is, is there a role for a small amount of sustainable or a lesser amount of sustainably produced meat? Yes or no? And disagreeing on that usually indicates that you're doing this for sort of different drivers, because the people who are motivated by doing this for the planet would say, yes, if it's sustainably produced, a hybrid, or, carefully, thoughtfully source feed, then I'm behind having some meat in the food system. Whereas if you're doing it for animal cruelty reasons, you would come to the conclusion that there should be no animals in our production system whatsoever. And there are just so many motivations that we project onto this protein transition for food security, which is an issue for a lot of countries. Singapore seems to be doing protein transition for some food security and a bit of economics, right? And that's very different for different individuals, but also per country. In the Netherlands, we were quite proud. We were among the first countries in the world to come out with a national protein strategy, the first in Europe, as far as I know. And this is just a very high overview of what's inside of the Dutch national protein strategy. So focus on cultivation of protein-rich crops. In the Netherlands, that can mean potatoes, which you might be surprised by, because potatoes don't have a lot of protein in them, but you can get such high yields on potatoes. They turn out to be quite efficient as protein crops. Grass is a potential protein crop. We have a lot of grass. For now, we put cattle on our grass, not necessarily what we need to do in the future. And pulses are, of course, interesting, but that's true for everyone and no one more than Canada. Then innovation in alternative proteins, where our national protein strategy acknowledged microbial and cultured as two key topics. Insects, primarily focused as a potential feed source. Also not, they are an animal. I want to acknowledge that too. But this is what our national protein strategy says. And upcycling of residual streams. So when we're processing, for example, it's canola for you or rapeseed in Europe, how can we get those back into the human food system? And it did give some attention to the consumption shift, although the national protein strategy at the time that it was written was rather more focused on the production side. But the Dutch government has set a goal of shifting, rebalancing back to 60% of our proteins coming from plant-based, which is sort of a reversal of where we were when the strategy was written. So this is the sort of collective goal. When we dig into consumers, how are they looking at and talking to us about their intentions with regard to their protein transition? This is kind of the good news slide. In the Netherlands, if you sort of add up the numbers, you can see that 52% of consumers in the Netherlands are telling us in one way or other that they do intend to reduce their meat consumption. So that includes the categories vegans, vegetarian, pescatarians, and also flexitarians. And we gave them a definition of that. I sometimes eat meat, but I am trying to reduce in the hopes to avoid those people who are just sort of rebranding, oh, but I always eat pasta once a week. And as you can see, most of Europe, we see at least sort of 40%, and we're sort of edging toward 50%, telling us that they fit to one of these categories, which is great. I mean, it's great to see this intention in our consumers. Staying on the topic of good news, we've also seen pulse consumption increasing. So this is direct consumption of pulses, which we are extremely happy about, because we think that's the lowest footprint, best for our health model of protein transition, is that we're all going to go, have chickpea curry, directly eat pulses for dinner. If you're happy to do that, we would like to say, please do that. It provides us with sustainable protein and least process intensity possible. I can tell we're going to have a great discussion about processed foods in a minute. So happy to see pulse consumption increasing. The slightly less good news in this is that although pulse consumption has doubled, we're still only at half of the recommended daily consumption. Also in the good news category, I think this is really exciting. Two of the biggest supermarket chains, and if I'm correctly informed, a third one has recently come out with targets. Our supermarket chains are actually setting hard targets for their protein ratios. So how much of their protein sold do they want to see coming from plant-based sources? So Albert Heijn, which is the biggest retailer in the Netherlands, is at 44% plant-based right now, and has set a goal of 50% by 2025, which is very soon, and 60% by 2030. Lidl, another supermarket chain, I think you will know that one, currently at 38% plant-based, but has set a goal of 50% plant-based by 2030. And we're really excited about what this means because the retailers are so leading for the food industry. Yeah, looking forward to see how this tracks. And other good news, Priera already sort of queued this up or clued you in on it. In the Netherlands, plant-based meat alternatives did reach price parity, not because we saw dropping prices, but because of the inflationary price pressure on meat, which really pushed up that category, so that across the different categories of chicken pieces, minced meat, and burgers, all three of them actually dropped below the comparative products, which is great. The sort of slight cloud in this picture is, this does not mean that our farmers or our production system is going along in the transition, because most of these lower price alternatives were based on a combination of soy protein and wheat gluten. So the farm transition really didn't happen, even though, we saw a price parity drop. So bit of a mixed picture there. And for us, we can talk about tracking plant-based sales. For us, the goal is not plant-based sales. We understand that that is a goal specifically for many companies who are working on that. For us, the goal is decreasing meat consumption. So if we're going over to eating more pulses and decreasing meat consumption, that would be a spectacular good news story. And plant-based meat alternatives, they are a means to that end, to help consumers who otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable making a more plant-based or veg-forward diet their habit. So we track meat consumption, dairy consumption on an annual basis. And you can look at this figure and think, well, maybe there's some room for optimism. I can tell you after 2021, there's less room for optimism. And I can also point you to the scale of this graph, which is going from 74 kilos to 80 kilos. Unfortunately, if there is any decline to be seen here, it's a very small decline. If you look back to 2005, when we were consuming, what is that, 76.7 or 8 kilos, and maybe we're at 76 now. It's really not, not the significant decline, and not headed in the direction we need to be going if we're going to reach the target set by the Dutch government or by the retailers. When we look at dairy, and this is pretty consistent with what Priera showed on the milk side, we do see a clear move away from liquid milk, and that corresponds with the increasing consumption of plant-based milk. So milk is really the one category where we do see this shift happening in the way that that shows us that consumers are happy with those products, right? Unfortunately, what we also see is an increase in cheese consumption, which is not completely surprising. When people go over to a vegetarian diet, they tend to start eating more cheese. Unfortunately, we need about 7 kilograms of milk to produce a kilogram of cheese. So the total decline in dairy is not, or the total consumption of dairy is not in decline. It's just a move inside of the category. So we dug in, we did some more research asking consumers what they're looking for, what they're not yet satisfied about, and that's sort of shown here in bold. So taste and health, it's no surprise that this comes back, and it's confirmed continuously in our consumer work. Also mentioned freshness, no additives, and of course lower prices are always mentioned, even though we had price parity. And I just wanted to dive into, and Priera has done the same, so I think we're also going to have a great conversation about this. This big question of like, what is healthy? So consumers are telling us they want something more healthy, but what do they really mean by it? And meat, of course, is rich in protein, but actually our figures show that most high-income country consumers are over-consuming protein. So actually we would prefer to see that we're not formulating alternatives on the basis of protein parity, but actually moving toward less protein, more fiber in the diet, which is overall beneficial for health. Also, formulators often feel under pressure to formulate for total amino acid nutrition, which is really not necessary if you're eating a varied diet. If you're eating pet food, if you are a toddler or an infant who's getting only one source of food in the diet, if you're on clinical nutrition, I understand it. If you're a normal adult human being who's eating peas and also bread at some point, rice at some point in the day, you're fine. This amino acid nutrition is not the core problem we need to be talking about. Of course, meat is whole and unprocessed, and Priya already sort of queued it up, that there is this sort of dilemma between whole and unprocessed and easy to digest. That, for example, the proteins in a chickpea are less accessible to us to digest. But on the other hand, there's more fiber, there are plant phytochemicals still left over in that, which could be beneficial. So there's a bit of a trade-off here. And of course, the conversation around, is healthy the lack of baddies? So do we get sodium out, or is it the presence of goodies? Should we be fortifying with B12, iron, et cetera? So just acknowledging that it's very easy as a consumer to say, I want this to be healthy, but different consumers can mean different things inside of that, which means we can't exactly address what they're asking us for at this moment without sort of settling or digging into what they really mean by healthy. Yeah, and I just want to also acknowledge that there are so many of these improvements that can't be done by any single actor in the supply chain. And I think that's also what James and Priya both were sort of hinting at and queuing up. It is really important to look at the total supply chain when we're talking about functional, nutritious, and tasty foods. Price, also something that we just cannot get done with a single link in the chain. It's going to need to be a supply chain collaboration to get the job done there. And with that, I have two little gifts for you, pitches for you. So we are having a conference in July at the Science and Technology of Meat and Dairy Analogs. I'd like to extend a warm welcome if any of you want to come to the Netherlands. This is a good moment to do so. And this is my small gift to you. Last year, we published a book, Our Future Proteins, and this book is available open access. So if you follow the QR code, you can download a PDF. It's in small print on the page. The big print says how to buy the book. It's our publisher's page. I'm sorry for that. But if you look for the small print, you're welcome to download the open access version of this book for free. And with that, I will stop sharing and look forward to the discussion. James?
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Stacy. I'm going to make sure that it's just the three of us queued up. Perfect. So thanks very much, Dr. Payette, and I think your PhD as well, so I'll call you Dr. Penske as well. I'm just incredibly grateful that you were both able to join us here today to provide just incredibly valuable insights that you have coming from, I think, similar sort of backgrounds, but obviously I think just reflecting the fact that you're so far away time zones. I believe it's late in the afternoon for Stacy and very early in the morning for Pri. One of the things that I want to kick things off is asking what your view is on the approach to winning over consumers in terms of the different geographic environments in which this work has to happen. Obviously, we see and know that different types of consumers exist around the world. Obviously, in a lot of the world, a significant portion of household incomes is being dedicated to food production, upwards of 50% in some of the lowest income countries around the world. And then you go to the United States of America, where I don't believe you're hitting the 10% threshold in terms of household income on average. And income is obviously just one of the many factors that affects people's purchasing habits and decisions. So I just wanted to get Pri, maybe I'll start with you. What your take is on how does the approach to winning over consumers have to vary depending on where they are in the world, and maybe specifically, are there regions that are sort of leaders and trendsetters that we need to be focusing in on in terms of again winning over that early majority consumer to plant and alternative proteins?
Yeah. So this is a really big question. And I think my summary of this is there's so many different types of consumers, not only because of different countries within countries, there's different types of consumers who want different things. Stacey, the whole time you were presenting, I was just like, yes, yes, yes. Like it's not only the fact that they want different things, it's that they also say they want something, but what they really want is something else. So it's like, there's so many different levels to this. And I think at the end of the day, when people are like, why don't we just make like better vegan products that aren't meat analogs that people really like. Why don't we make something that looks exactly like a steak? Like people always have all these different ideas. Why don't we blend it with animal meat? Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And my answer is always like, yes, like do it. Everything. We need all of it. We need a market that has a lot of different options. And I actually think that's like the beautiful thing about alternative proteins. Like, especially if you look at plant proteins, the functionality of them is like so different than animal proteins. Very, very different. And within the plant-based category, we have a lot of different types of functionalities too, which you don't get that variation as much with animal protein. So we actually have an opportunity to form a lot of really diverse products because we have a really cool like sandbox to play with in the beginning, you know. But going into that, I'll just really quickly touch upon a few of those points. So from an income perspective, there's a number of really great non-government organization reports that really study the way that agricultural land and resources are being consumed worldwide. And a lot of them point to higher income countries really being the ones that could take the lead on that protein diversification. Whereas lower income countries, as you mentioned, James, you know, as people increase their standard of living, they do look more towards meat. And I think in instances where it makes sense to have more concentrated nutrients in lower income countries, like they might actually need to increase meat consumption in some places. I'm not necessarily advocating for that. I'm just saying that there's definitely a level of us trying to understand where everybody's at, and the higher income countries that do have more resources, more diversity in their diet, more instances where they can pick up nutrients from very different things throughout the day. That's a really good place that we should be starting and driving things. And I will say that to me, there's a few countries that I really look at as like, wow, you guys are killing it right now, and we need more of that globally. We need more of that in your country. So I do think the Netherlands is a really great example. There's a lot of tension there from a meat consumption point of view as well, and the farmers. But I do think like the supermarket work that's being done of actually like having these aims of having plant-based products available and actually being bought by consumers, that's something that's not being done in a lot of other places in the world, maybe a little bit in Germany. I also think Denmark is fantastic. They're really doing such a great job. Look at their nutrition guidelines. Just they're so simple, easy to digest. They did such a good job of giving those to their consumers, and it's really focused on a plant-rich diet. And I think that they're just doing a great job and funneling money towards it. And then I'd, of course, be remiss to not mention Canada. Canada is doing such a great job. First of all, you guys have like the most wonderful agriculture. You're the breadbasket of the world for these alternative protein products. But then also Protein Industries Canada is doing wonderful, wonderful work with the government and working with industry right now. So I think those are some examples of those higher income countries that are really leading the way. And I'll stop there. So sorry.
All right. Thanks so much, Pri. And Stacy, so you're, I think, for me, in a really interesting situation being in Europe, because I think I always look at trends amongst higher income countries and view most of Europe as being more progressive than sort of a lot of other developed countries. But I also know that there's an enormous amount of diversity, both culturally, income, across Europe. So I was interested maybe if you could answer that same question in terms of how do you approach things differently within that European context that itself is so diverse.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Europe is not homogeneous by any means whatsoever. You know, the Netherlands tends to form a bloc with some Scandinavian countries, Germany, you know, and we're as on board with this as we can be, acknowledging that there is still a lot of polarization, and also especially all of this pain around farm livelihoods happening that's even, you know, found its way into our politics. There's a farmer party, political party in the Netherlands in the meantime. But consumers are largely sort of on board with this, as I showed, which I think is great news. But each country within Europe is seeing this differently. And, you know, in France, for example, the meat companies are lobbying very hard against the protein transition, while the researchers that I know are very enthusiastically embracing it. You know, Italy passed a law. They're sort of going with Florida, trying to ban cultured meat. So yeah, Italy is just, or Europe, sorry, is just incredibly diverse. I did want to respond on just where I think we are maybe missing a bit of attention that I think would be really relevant. Um, we think that the low socioeconomic status consumers are a group that are sort of underattended to and understudied with regard to this. And I would love to see us developing strategies to address their specific needs. Price parity is probably not enough. I believe we could get there. Like a can of chickpeas is a very inexpensive dinner option, and why are we not specifically directing our attention to showing the benefits that we could have for low socioeconomic status consumers? And then on the part about the low middle income country context, I did want to just, I mean, I understand completely from an ethical standpoint that it is, we have to be very careful not to say, don't do what I do, do as I say, right? Like we are in no position to be telling people not to eat meat at this point. At the same time, we did some consumer work with an amazing partner in Rwanda that showed us that there is a significant group of consumers who are very concerned about climate change, who are very concerned about finding a sustainable diet, who are very ready to embrace plant-based options if they're available to them. So I also think there's a sort of equity question in, are we making our alternative protein technologies available to low and middle income countries, and how can we collectively put some more effort into that? And I will also mention then that some of the consumer feedback we got back was that there were surprising benefits that consumers would love about these products. For example, we just tested a simple TVP, textured vegetable protein, and we learned that for people who could ambient store that TVP so they didn't need to have refrigeration in their home, this was a massive benefit, because otherwise, if they want fresh meat, to go to the fresh market every day because they don't have a refrigerator in their home, and there are food safety questions, obviously, with keeping meat at high temperatures. So a TVP that they could keep for 6 weeks and provide it to their family, giving the children an experience of that texture of meat, a feeling of it, like sort of rich, fulfilling meal, actually created a feeling of a lot of pride that they could provide that to their family without this, slog to the market on a daily basis. So I do think there are really underattended opportunities in the global South, and especially the low middle income countries, that we're potentially missing altogether.
No, that's a really interesting final point there, and it reminds me we did a study looking at sort of a similar issue with food security in northern Canada, where you have very remote populations and food prices across the board are very, very high. Typically, transport of fresh food is it's either seasonal on ice roads or having to be flown in. And we looked at whether or not there was that opportunity, exactly using shelf-stable products to either extend existing meat supplies or have alternative protein products available. I want to jump into, we talked about it a little bit, but price is one area that I want to talk about. When we talk about pricing and price parity, we're in a very interesting industry and a very interesting time, I think, because we require an enormous amount of research and development to be done to bring new products to market. But our products are sold at incredibly low margins compared to other new technologies. We are not the Silicon Valley unicorn darlings where your ad sales or phone sales are giving you a 60, 70, 80% gross margin. Our industry is much, much leaner. And so my question is broadly, how do you see us and companies working in our space able to generate the returns necessary to reinvest in growth and research and development, but still also driving price down, knowing that we're already pushing the limits on margin for our space, and that this is truly is a volume industry in terms of how it grows. So Pri, maybe I'll start with you on that. And just I know I'm droning on right now, but we probably only got about 10 minutes left. So I want all of your insights, but likely as concisely as possible. And I know I'm guilty there too. So
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I will mention is that we're planning on doing a plant-based meat techno-economic analysis soon, probably next year. So I think those techno-economic analyses that really dig into the specific steps of a process are going to help a lot with decreasing prices, because we'll be able to pinpoint exactly where in the supply chain we need to decrease those prices. Um, there's something to be said about economies of scale, obviously. There's if we are able to produce at a much larger volume, hopefully that'll lower costs as well. That being said, I will say that there's just so many opportunities, both from a tech point of view of being able to decrease costs, whether that be energy use and like a spray dryer, or something like that. We can look at those specific instances. I do think that there is a lot of room for government policies that can really help with decreasing costs as well. So I think that there's a point that we're going to be able to reach with production in mind, but then there's that ultimate point where at the end of the day, most agriculture and the most things that we eat in the world are available to us at a price because of the work that the government does to supply to farmers and manufacturers and processors across the supply chain. So whatever governments end up deciding to put that money towards, that will ultimately affect the price of those goods. So hopefully, we'll have more governments like Denmark that are really advocating for those shifts and putting money towards those.
Fantastic. Stacey, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really just building on what Priya has said. And I always come back to like wisdom from my mom when I'm thinking about this. Like there are two ways to change. There's the painful way to change, and there's the proactive avoiding the pain. And I fear that we are a bit on a course to take the painful route. And the painful route is there's going to be increasing impact of climate change on our food system. There's going to be increasing scarcity of resources, going to be increasing price pressure on animal source foods. And that means hungry people in the most vulnerable of places. That means, low socioeconomic households who struggle to feed their kids. That's the root of pain. And that's the route that we're going to go if we don't have alternatives ready when we need them in advance of this painful route. And there, I think we need to be talking very clearly to governments that, if you want to avoid pain, if you want this to be an economic win instead of, a hungry people situation, please, please, please de-risk, because there's no way we get to price parity without achieving scale. And for many of these alternative proteins, scale is 5 years out, scale at least, right? So please, governments, step in. You're avoiding pain for yourself. That said, I echo, around, what can we do in this sort of product or food technology landscape right away to get price down? It's moving away from highly refined protein isolates and toward less refined concentrates, which are air classified, wind sifted, that's easy, or flours. So we're setting up a project to see how we can combine those like flours, just ground flours with a very small amount of a protein isolate, for example, to capture the functional performance. That's the short-term win, but the big-term win is we need massive de-risking from governments and other philanthropic investors, whoever, help.
I think one of the things that I noted there, Stacey, is you talked about the impact that growth and demand for animal protein has in terms of pushing up prices and how that impacts lower income consumers. And I think we always forget to note that as we see more resources, again, that limited global ag land availability, as we see more of those resources being dedicated to protein consumption for higher income households, that's inevitably going to drive up basic food crop prices for the lowest income households around the world. So again, I think I said it at the beginning that I think that this is sort of the quietest crisis that humanity is going to be facing. And I think that if we don't solve it now and early, we are going to see that enormous human suffering at a very, very large scale in the coming decades. There was a question from attendees, and I think that this is probably we discussed this a little bit in our pre-call, but the question was around skepticism and maybe fear of novel proteins. And we talked a little bit about that perceived unnaturalness. We've talked about ultra processed and where we're positioning in terms of being processed foods, but how that's clearly something that consumers are concerned about for a variety of reasons, some with merit and some without. And so I want to get your takes on how we as an industry approach that. How do we bring a technology that's novel and new and interesting and a little bit science fiction-y to consumers, and how do we win them over, knowing that the trends are all going in the other direction, is that people want products that look more like they did 50 years ago than they do 50 years into the future. How do we reconcile that difference, and how do we bridge that gap as we bring those novel ingredients to market? So Stacey, maybe I'll let you kick this question off.
Well, you wanted a little bit of controversy in the panel, so I'm just going to make a very blunt statement and say we don't convince consumers of anything. Like, I don't think we should. Like, food autonomy is such a deeply held, cherished right that there's no use trying to tell someone to eat something that they're not enthusiastically ready to sit down and eat. And I think Priya already sort of hinted at it, that offering a diversity of products and a diversity of options is something we can do with all proteins. Like, a can of chickpeas is fantastic. If you are against highly processed foods and cultured meat sounds scary to you, eat chickpea curry. That is amazing. And that's something we can help people do. Maybe those are intimidating to prepare. Maybe we need inspiration from recipes. We need supermarket interventions. We need to look at whether the discounts offered by the supermarkets are encouraging meat consumption or getting people to buy a can of chickpeas. But I'm not sure we need to convince anybody to eat cultured meat if that's not what they're excited for, but there will be a subset of the population who love the taste of meat and are probably animal ethics driven, who are really enthusiastic and motivated for cultured meat. Great, let's make that for them.
That's great. Pri, your thoughts?
Yeah, we have seen, big transitions in the way that we eat, throughout the decades. And it is possible. It's just offering people the things that they really want. And I think one of the points of that is that sometimes what consumers want isn't what they say that they want. And so I think that there's a lot of narrative right now around process and like not being nutritious and not enough protein and things like that. But I do think that at the end of the day, especially in the US, and I think Canada too, and Europe, if you put something delicious in front of people that's affordable, like, they're going to eat it. And they won't ask too many questions about how it was made, or anything like that. But it has to be delicious, and they have to be able to get to that point of, okay, like, this is great and I like eating it, and that's that. So I think that that's really just kind of like what's the most important thing right now. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
No, that's a great answer, and I think selfishly picking this question, I think that has been a big part of the approach that we have taken in the way that we've structured our business. Is that I very firmly believe that you want to make sure that things are recognizable to people, that things are understandable, and that foods meet their own personal and cultural preferences. And for us, we've looked at that hybrid strategy as that baby step into the space for maybe the folks that are a little bit skeptical. I'm always recalling meeting a couple of our customers in line at a grocery store and seeing our products on the conveyor belt and asking, oh, why does this appeal to you? And then one of the partners in the family saying, the long list of reasons that we expected in terms of environmental, nutritional profile of what we had developed, et cetera. And then their partner looking at me dead in the eyes and saying, I don't care about that in the slightest. I just like that it tastes good. And I like that that my partner makes the foods with that are family's favorite things with it. So I think that you're right. It is going to be a different approach for different people depending on where they're at. But at the end of the day, if you're making a delicious product that is at an affordable price, I think that that goes a long way to winning people over. A question that I had around, I think polling data is really interesting to me. 5 years ago, we designed our business, and I still recall poring over the copious amounts of polling information on consumer intent with respect to plant and alternative protein, and what people were saying that they were going to be doing. And 5 years later, I reflect back on that and realize just how horribly incorrect and askew that data was. I'm curious to know your thoughts on whether or not your organizations have made a shift away from using polling data that's sort of asked people what their intention is versus doing more qualitative research work that looks at what people's actual behaviors are when they're at home, at restaurants, and in grocery stores. Pri, maybe I'll kick things off with you.
Yeah, so I as the scientist, I focus on the tech and our corporate engagement team really digs into like spins data and Euromonitor. So they'd be able to talk to you guys about this a lot more. But I think GFI does a really good job of balancing it, where we do take a lot of the quantitative data that's available right now on the market and like what we can take. A lot of the reason why these things are in retail numbers, although we do have unit sales. I did see a Q&A about that as well. And the last year retail went up because prices went up, but unit numbers did go down a little bit, but they're all pretty like negligible anyway. It's mostly flat, I would say. But yeah, I think that's kind of like so sorry. I completely lost my train of thought. Stacey, do you want to take it away? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I got you. No
Just
problem.
hand the baton off.
Yeah, so we do both. I mean, we ask consumers about their intention. We try to segment consumers based on the motivations that they're sharing with us, but we also look, we do very, very practical work. And there are some learnings in there that I can share. I mean, number one, people are lazy. So the number one thing that we can do to shift people's diets is make the default vegetarian. That changes, like that sells 20% of consumers just immediately go over to vegetarian if the default is vegetarian. Like, we just don't want to make a fuss when we're in the restaurant. So we did a study. There was an option for like a chicken wrap, like a Mexican chicken wrap, or a bean-based wrap. And if you give, there's no default, you know, the consumers segment in a certain way. If the default is beans, like, then the majority of people eat the beans. I mean, it's so easy. So that's number one, people are lazy. Number two, we also found out that educating people in a positive way, not telling them what to eat, but inspiring them with recipes of or meal examples of things that would be nice. There was one city in the Netherlands that just the mayor of that city was very dedicated to sustainable diets, and we did a complete intervention. So we got, I think, 6 or 7 different supermarkets, the schools, and some catering partners all involved. And we did a whole campaign over a series of weeks, just teaching consumers. And the retail partners had sort of features in the store, helping consumers, with options. I think there was like a tofu and a chickpea-based option, and there were recipes and little cards of inspiration and messages from the mayor, right? And that worked too. We actually saw citywide, we could measure a change in diets, a significant change in diets during the intervention. We did also a measurement of like how long did that last afterward, and you could see it sort of, you have to be proactively engaging people for the effect to happen. And then, the last thing is positioning matters. So we also did an intervention together with the Lidl here in the Netherlands, where we made product formats for plant-based meat alternatives that looked exactly like the meat. So the packaging was clear that this was a plant-based option, but that the sort of size and the type of meat, the size of the package and the type of meat and the amount that was in the package were identical to their meat products. So it would be very easy for someone to just grab the plant-based and make the recipe that they had in mind anyway. And we positioned those products next to the meat. And again, it was very clear that this was a plant-based option. So we didn't want any sort of confusion happening. Instead of in that shelf, so the normal Lidl supermarket, you have to intend to buy something vegetarian or vegan and go to that shelf. No, it was positioned immediately there. So you had in mind you're going to make spaghetti bolognese, and there's a perfect sort of ground beef exactly in the spot where you normally walk to. And we just published last week together with the Lidl that this was actually also a highly impactful intervention, just because the meat eaters don't walk to the vegetarian shelf, right? So just having that position and that exact product format that you've already decided that's what you're buying, having that available to you at the moment of selection is also very impactful. There's so much we can do on the food environment if we just get the will and get the partners together to get it done.
I have so many follow-up questions on shelf space and positioning. One issue that we ran into, I fully agree in theory with that in terms of where products should be positioned, but in discussions with grocery store staff, that's been an interesting challenge for us, is that we talk to them. The meat counter staff are not our strongest proponents by any stretch of the imagination, and that certainly has been a barrier for us when essentially you're the person that's most directly connected to sale, that's able to do the most education, is not only probably is just simply opposed to the product's existence in a lot of cases, presents some challenges, and I think finding a balance between that benefit of being in the meat case versus needing some special attention and time to focus on consumer education is a bit of a challenge. But I have so many questions and I'm so frustrated, but we are already 10 minutes over time, and I am going to be respectful of all of the attendees that came in and participated, and both of your time as well. This was a fantastic discussion. Again, there's also great questions in the Q&A that we didn't get to around what do we do potentially with that. Stacy, you mentioned grasses, and what do we do with the 65% of global ag land that is currently available for pasture if we start to see a decline in conventional livestock production. There's questions in the Q&A around both nutrition and allergy and exposure to consumers, and I want to thank the people that put those questions in. I think that the answer that you'll find, I think definitely seek out the resources, the reports that Pri mentioned, and I certainly will be downloading Stacy's book. I'll put in for a physical copy and give their publisher some kudos, and make sure that we're tuning into all of the good work and presentations that both Wageningen University and the Good Food Institute are doing in this space. So with that, I think I'll draw this webinar to a close, and thank you so much. And thank you as well to the fantastic team at Manitoba Agriculture who pulled this all together. My work really was just an hour here doing the presentation. They did all of the legwork in terms of getting things organized. So thank you so much to the team there. And thank you again to Stacy and Pri. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope it's not the last one that we have, because there's so many things, insight and input that I think that you both have into how we grow this space and how we really do make a meaningful impact on those challenges that the world faces with respect to feeding ourselves in a way that's sustainable and affordable, and that minimizes human suffering and environmental degradation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, James. It was great meeting you.
Thank
Feelings
you.
mutual.